Welcome back, you sons of bitches.
Oh my goodness, welcome back. Are we glad to see you all for the first episode of season two of Not That Bad? Season two. We were in a whole nother season. We left for a short period of time, and by the time we came back, our show
You
changed on
see,
us.
we didn't have scheduling issues. We were just
This is all
between
part of the
seasons.
plan. Well, folks, yeah, struggling podcast or not, we are your favorite bad take artists back recording another episode. My name is Connor, aka grain enthusiast Chris Farley, and I, of course, am joined by the legendary, the illustrious Mr. Gabe Tice in his Robocop t shirt. Gabe, how are you?
At least I have respect for the dead. Chris, what did you call him?
I said I am grain enthusiast Chris Barley.
Chris Barley.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Rest in
Barley's a
peace
Barley's
to
a
a
grain.
legend, right? Chris Barley.
Oh,
Jesus.
yeah. The AKAs, sometimes they're good, sometimes maybe no good. Sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit. I don't know. Anyways, how you doing after all this time, man? We've had all this time away. We're finally back here. Before we talk about the movie, let's talk about how you're doing.
How am I doing? I don't think I really have an emotional state between podcasts. I think I just hibernate until it's
Oh,
time to record again. No, I mean, thinking about the last time that we recorded and put down an episode, things have been happening. I do hope that I can bring some cool news to you guys, some new projects on the horizon. That's definitely all I'll say for now. I'm an incredibly superstitious guy. My family can't ring things out of me. They're like, "So, honey, who have you been talking to about this new script?" No one. Well, what's it about? Nothing. What's it
I,
called? It's the script with no name, mom. Just stop asking about it. No.
I've never written
Uh
a script in my entire life.
Arguably true. Arguably true. No, things have been going well. I
Oh,
definitely took a break over the holidays, a mental break.
yeah.
I've been watching more movies in the theaters than before. I think you didn't watch a single movie in theaters last year. Is that
I
right?
didn't watch a single movie that came out last year. I haven't seen a single movie that came out in the year 2023 yet. It was a really bad year as far as timing went for me. I was really disappointed, and then I finally, the last day of the year, literally the last day of the year, I had an opportunity that I had some time free, and I said, you know what? It's a meme at this point. I'm just gonna watch something else, and so I did. So yeah, I didn't see any movies that came out last year, unfortunately. Glad to hear that you're getting to the theater more. I think it's an experience that a lot of people are kind of trading in for the streaming experience now. And if that's what you're all about, cool. No annoying teenagers in your living room. Well, unless you have annoying teenagers in your house. Uh, but there's nothing like that theater experience. What's the last thing you went and saw? Out of curiosity.
Last night I saw The Beekeeper.
Ooh, The Beekeeper. How was that? Jason Statham's new
Jason
action
Statham,
vehicle.
the last action hero, the only action hero that I would consider to be in his prime and to actually be uh consistently putting out uh those kinds of classic action throwback movies. Like when we talk about the state of action films, people talk about Tom Cruise and Keanu Reeves, but those guys are like they they wear the action hero like a suit, right? Especially
Yes.
Keanu, because he's had a very versatile career. Jason Statham is a bloke who was invented in a bloke laboratory to be put in projects exactly like The Beekeeper, and people have been uh, praising it in an ironic way. I had an unironically good time with it. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. As somebody who doesn't really miss the testosterone era of action movies that much. It's not like something I'm super fond of. It still won me over. And I've always liked Jason Statham. I mean, it's interesting that he is the action man on poster now when he started out doing Guy Ritchie movies. He started out doing Snatch. And I
Yeah.
I really want people to look back and remember just how charismatic of an actor he is and not just how good of a puncher or kicker he is.
Yeah, I think so many of these action movies that come out now, they either get people talking the wrong way or the right way. And I feel like more and more lately, they get people talking the wrong way. They talk about the agendas behind action movies or whatever else you can talk about. I just like when a movie comes out and it's just fun. It doesn't really matter what you think, what you believe, who you are, where you're from. You can go see it. You can have a good time. It seems like The Beekeeper is that kind of movie.
Well, it's
It
interesting you
seems
say
like a
that.
fun movie.
I don't know. Well, it is a fun movie for me, but it's interesting you say that because it was the most explicitly political action movie I've seen. Like, it's
Okay.
sort of being embraced by the anti-woke crowd, or at least people who it's being brought up as an example of non-woke movies or apolitical movies
Interesting.
because
Okay.
the script is so devoted to indulging in action cliches. But the truth is, it's like the most politically charged movie. Like, you won't really believe just how much commentary a movie called The Beekeeper goes for. This is the same movie where somebody asks Jason Statham with a gun to his head to be or not to be. And Jason Statham
Okay.
says, I think to be. And then he presses a button on his watch, making a bunch of cars explode. That's how
Oh my God.
the
I need to
conflict
see
in
this.
yeah, that's how the conflict in The Beekeeper is resolved. But that's punctuating scenes of allegory to the deep state and to crypto scams. Hillary Clinton is
Oh God.
basically a character. And the thing is,
Oh
I don't
boy.
know where to classify it. Is it woke? Is it anti-woke? Is it does it hate both of those camps equally? I actually really look forward to the debate that people might have about the socio-political agenda of The Beekeeper, but it has an agenda. There's no doubt about that.
Well, speaking of politics, speaking of debates and that whole nature around the political scene in the United
Always a
States,
master of the segue.
today
Always a master of segues.
today we are discussing a movie that is about that very topic, more localized than national, but that's okay. We're talking about 1996's Black Sheep, starring Chris Farley, David Spade. It is the follow-up for them for Tommy Boy, incredibly successful comedy film released a few years prior. 28% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 2.9 out of 5 on Letterboxd. That rating has grown since I actually added it to my personal list to cover on this show last year. It was at a 2.7 when I added it to my list, and it seems to be growing in popularity, but clearly a film that disappointed a lot of people. Do you have any experience background with this movie? I know that we're both big Chris Farley fans. Is this one that you saw early, or did you come to this one a little later?
This movie's in my lore. Like, if you were
Okay.
to understand my mythology, it's in there. It's in the lore. Specifically, it has important lore for my history with my wife, and that's really the reason I wanted to talk about this. Spoiler alert, I don't know how much passion I have for this movie as like a single entity, as an artifact, but basically it goes like this. um this is back when me and my wife were dating, and I was at her house, and her dad, he had a copy of Black Sheep. So I tell my wife, have you seen this? This is, oh my God, this is one of Chris Farley's movies. This is one of the few movies that he got to make since he obviously, uh,
Gone too
died so
soon.
tragically young. And I'd never seen it, but I wanted to watch it to see just what, if anything, this had for fans of his, who obviously, we, when it comes to people who pass away too soon, we go back and we really go over their body of work with a fine tooth comb to, to cope with the fact that obviously they
Right.
are not with us anymore to produce new material. So even stuff that, in their lifetime was definitely not considered any sort of crown jewel, that's not Black Sheep at all, I still wanted to watch it. So she agrees, we watch it, and we are not impressed. It's a terrible, terrible first impression for Chris Farley, unfortunately. And the thing is that my wife is very upset with me because since then I've actually looked back at this movie fondly. I've always gone like, that's actually it's a fine movie. Like, it's a pleasant watch. And she points out that while watching it, I was really picking apart the screenplay. I was really picking apart how little this represented such little growth for Chris Farley's career, and we can talk about this movie's relationship with Tommy Boy. But overall, I still looked back at this with rose tinted glasses because that's just how much I like Chris Farley. And this just existed to be a vehicle for Chris Farley and his burgeoning film career. So the thing with vehicles is it rides or dies on the charisma of its star. And in this case, it was Chris Farley. So he elevates this completely, like nothing else you can compare it to. He elevated Black Sheep for me into something that I look back at fondly. And my wife does not have those rose tinted glasses. She will always hate this movie. So it's always been a bit of an in joke between us. And I sometimes joke that she is glad that Chris Farley is dead because of how much she did not take to this movie. Nah, that's a joke. That's
I was gonna say
that I need to suspend. That's a joke I need to suspend.
Oh man.
So that's my history with this. I'd only ever seen it once before the recording, but it's always kind of loomed in the background for me because it, I don't know, was this is at such a crossroads between my wanting to love it and the actual reality of the quality of it.
Yeah, and one thing to put into context too about this kind of period of time for Farley, because this was sort of pretty early on, and it was definitely early on in his career as a leading man. He had a couple of good years appearing in films, movies like Wayne's World and Wayne's World 2, Airheads, Billy Madison, and I think he was in Coneheads too, but that's, we won't talk about Coneheads. Either way, though. He gets to star in Tommy Boy, and then this year, 1996, was the beginning of 3 really tough years for him, and we were going to see that turn around. So we got 96 Black Sheep, 97 was Beverly Hills Ninja, which didn't do well also. He actually really physically hurt himself in that movie, and he was he beat up on himself a lot mentally afterwards because of its failure. And then that was followed up by his last film, last official completed film in 1998, Almost Heroes, with
starring another
Gone Before His Time
comedian.
Yes,
Matthew Perry.
And it really sucks because that same year he was also in Norm Macdonald's movie Dirty Work, which he just appeared in, and that was a movie that was critically panned as well. We were about to really see a renaissance of Farley's career, even though he really hadn't had a long career to begin with. He was going to be the star of Shrek. He was going to play Fatty Arbuckle in a biopic about him.
Was that official? Had that gone off the ground?
The person that was writing the biopic said that they had been given a lot of like mixed signals about whether or not it was happening, but that nobody would have been more perfect for the film than Farley.
Well, who else was...
And Farley was preparing himself for it, too.
Yeah. You know who else was trying to star in a Fatty Arbuckle bio, right?
I don't.
John Belushi.
I mean, and one of the things that's tragic about Farley, too, is that how like beloved he was. And in a song that Adam Sandler performed when he returned to Saturday Night Live a few years back was about Chris Farley, and how everybody told him he would end up like his heroes, which were John Belushi and John Candy. So, the fact that ended up coming to pass is terrible. He really is, to me, I think he's one of the funniest people of all time. I think he's got one of the most charismatic... he can just be charismatic in anything he does.
It's not just that he was funny. Like, that's really underselling the value of Chris Farley, the unique quality of Chris Farley. He was the most intensely likable human being. He was somebody who commanded the screen with a rare quality among stars, which is friendliness, kindness. I mean, we always have a place in culture for guys like Chris Farley. We want the best friend of movie stars, but the way he turned that into a force of personality, the way he was this force of nature with that's what's so unparalleled. And that's what, I don't know. It's like, is he really gone? He still doesn't feel gone because I don't think anybody has eclipsed him.
I don't think so either, and I think it's impossible to because he's a one of one. Nobody
Mhm.
can be Chris Farley, and we've seen it. I mean, he's got a brother that looks just like him, but not just like him, but it's close enough that they could have done stuff with his brother, but it just never worked because he's
They could
not
have tried
Chris.
the Jim Belushi, but I
It's
mean,
not
if
going to work,
it's not going to
and
work, if Jim
and
Belushi proved anything, it's not going to work.
yes, and
Yeah.
and Jim Belushi also, they're like no slight on him either. He's just not John, and none of Chris's brothers are Chris because he's a one of one, and it's really interesting to think about what the world would be like with a Shrek movie that's starring Chris Farley, or with a Fatty Arbuckle biopic that
Yeah.
maybe people would have really seen his dramatic chops in.
Well,
It's
it's
just a
like
world we'll
just
never see.
going back to John Belushi, another guy. I know there's a lot more distance with John Belushi's death, and I think I don't want to say his legacy is fading from memory, but it doesn't have that relevancy, that sore wound nature
Right.
that Chris Farley's death has. But John Belushi, he was going through a similar thing. He had a movie career after an amazing run on SNL, and
Yep.
his movie career started off well with things like Animal House and The Blues Brothers, and then because of a mixture of him taking bad projects and personal turmoil in his own life with addiction problems, his career was declining. It was declining fast, but he was set to star in something that should have been a huge comeback vehicle for him. He was going to be in Ghostbusters, but of course, with his untimely passing, that role went to Bill Murray. And it's crazy to imagine an alternate reality where John Belushi stars in Ghostbusters and Chris Farley stars in Shrek. Now,
Yeah.
I don't want to make it sound like I like Bill Murray in Ghostbusters is one of those all-time iconic
Of course.
roles. Like, I'm not
Yes.
saying, oh, I wish that, like, I think Bill Murray or Mike Myers were wrong for those projects. They just got those because these other actors died. It's not like that. It's just
Right.
that's the nature of this industry
Yes.
and of creativity, is opportunities that are gained and lost, either through merit or through sometimes tragedy.
Or both. I mean, I think both could be said for both of those cases.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Murray, a legendary actor for his time, and even still to this day, and of course Mike Myers, another. Just he's considered a legendary status in the comedy world. He's done a lot of great things, and obviously Shrek is considered to be one of the best animated movies ever. People love Ghostbusters. They say it's one of the best films of the 80s. It's a lot of people's favorite movie that I talk to who like 80s movies.
Yeah,
So,
Ghostbusters really transcends this,
absolutely.
but
Yeah.
Black Sheep, where that fits in, is this middle class of movies of the SNL comedy era. The really interesting
Yes.
thing about SNL back then is that it was not just the show. Like, there was this whole institution
Right.
of SNL and the offspring and the spin-offs and the things it created, not just by making its performers stars, which it did, but even just like Black Sheep, it's not technically an SNL movie, but I cannot disassociate it with uh, the SNL of that era.
Well, it doesn't help either that even though all of these movies, whether they were SNL or not, even though they all have people who were just at that, especially at that point, known more for their appearances on the show than they were, any films or television shows, especially as a star. But all of these films, it felt like in, I don't want to say style, but the way that they look, the way that they play. Like, you could watch these all in a marathon and think that they're all the same studio, that they're all the same director, maybe. Like, all
Well,
of them
that's
have this the same uniform look that just it's like they were trying to capitalize on the fact that they have these SNL stars by making it look like the movies that SNL had put out, like a Wayne's World.
like
This
Wayne's World, which was, I think, the
yes.
most recent kind of SNL breakthrough into film before this, maybe before Tommy Boy, if you want to put it up there. The thing is that Tommy Boy had a
Well, there
star
was
that
Coneheads.
okay. The
Oh
second
God.
worst thing that John Landis ever did. What?
Uh, oh boy. Oh boy. Wait. John Landis didn't do Coneheads.
He didn't? Yeah, he did.
No, that was Oh my God. What was his name? Hold on. I have it here. I can pull it up. It was
Steve
Steve
Barron.
Barron. Yeah, Steve Barron, who also did the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie.
Why did I think that John Landis did Coneheads? Oh, because he did another movie around that time. The I think it was called the Idiots or the Morons or something.
Let's see. John Landis. What was it? This is all staying in, by the way.
What am I thinking of? Oh, the
Let me.
Stupids. Yeah, he did the
Stupids. Okay,
Stupids
the
with Tom
Stupids.
Arnold.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Oh, Tom Arnold. Wow. What a. I need to see that movie for sure.
Oh, do you?
No. No. Absolutely not.
You missed this show, didn't you, folks?
Oh God. Oh boy. I'm
Where else
interested
are
to
you
see
going to
how
get
much of this how much of
this
this actually makes the cut. But
level of research?
oh yes, but anyways, we will continue here as if that did not happen, I suppose. God, if we even can, I don't even know where to pick up here.
Here's the
Oh
question.
jeez.
And we're not doing the good, bad, and the ugly because honestly, I don't even know how
Fuck
to
it,
break
man.
up this movie in that way. Basically, this movie is a series of vignettes. It's loosely connected through this vague plot line that Chris Farley is the ne'er-do-well, dim-witted brother of a politician running to be governor of Washington State. And there's a plot by the other candidate to get Chris Farley in trouble, basically to scandalize this guy's campaign.
Yeah.
And this is a time capsule movie in so many ways, right? You have Chris Farley and David Spade, but this is in Washington State during the 90s, so you do get flavors of the grunge scene happening then. I think that's another reason why I go easy on this movie because especially at that time, that was my jam. And then this is playing off of this archetype of the politician's dumb relative. Like they bring it up in this movie.
Yeah.
I think the tagline for this was that Chris Farley was can I even remember all these people? Jimmy Carter had a kind of infamous brother who was always making headlines with his antics. I think at this time George W. Bush might have been considered the black sheep of that family. Of course, I don't know if they name drop him here, but that's what
And
I mean.
this isn't quite the same too, but this was also kind of around the time that SNL was making fun of Rudy Giuliani's son, who would like make a ton of noise and like be a disturbance at press conferences in New York. And so this was a big time of like this is when the political cartoons of like the 60s, 70s, and 80s really started turning into like more actual like video parodies. Like SNL was doing a lot of political stuff around this time. There were whole television shows created around the premise of like making fun of politicians, and it was this whole era of just like, yeah, we don't trust these people now, but we think it's really funny. That
It's
and
not
we
just
think
that
their
we don't
family's
trust
really
these people;
funny.
we think they're buffoonish. Like there was
Yes, right.
a really low level of respect for the political class, but it wasn't the flavor of it today, which is like conspiratorial,
Right.
anti, like nobody was accusing like SNL was not going out there accusing Ronald Reagan of being a pedophile or drinking the blood of children. It was just like, hey, this
Right.
guy, he seems really stupid. And Bill Clinton, like, oh, he really has a thing for fast food. It's kind of like
Right.
looking back, it feels very, very naive in a sort of precious way. But
I
to put
know.
it in modern terms, okay, Chris Farley is playing Hunter Biden, right?
Holy shit. Yeah.
playing Hunter Biden, and
Kinda, yeah.
you got Marjorie Taylor Greene and the rest of the Freedom Caucus out to
Oh, you could call him Jeb Bush if you really wanted to.
Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush was like he was supposed to be the heir apparent.
Oh, I know he was, but now think of what everybody knows Jeb Bush as now. That's kind of what Farley is in this. If Farley's character ever got involved in politics, he would probably be what people think of Jeb Bush as today.
I think honestly, this Chris Farley is kind of playing, and I hate to compare a man that I love to a man that I hate, but I feel like this kind of harmless, lovable dolt that he's playing is the image that people had of George W. Bush before Iraq.
I think so. No, I do. I think that there's a lot of parallels. He mixes up things that he says a lot. He gets himself into a lot of dumb situations. I think that is. I mean, that was as somebody. I think you can remember this. I mean, even though we were kids back then, even after everything happened and the war started, that was like the big joke. I remember that constantly. Anytime George W. Bush came up, then you would start hearing things like strategery or, things like that.
And by the way, at this time, Chris Farley was playing Newt Gingrich. So for the crowd who laments at how SNL got political after Trump, I mean, everybody was fair game. Everybody. And obviously it tended to skew liberal, I'm sure. Although
as a lot of media does, I think. As far as movies and television shows, like Hollywood side of media does tend to lean a little bit more that way.
I don't want people. This movie does not have enough substance to be political. There's not a political message and agenda.
It's so strange. It's like the only thing that they're trying to get across that could be considered like a political message is the fact that there is the villain of the movie is a crooked politician. Other than that, there doesn't feel like there's any sides. I don't even think they mention political parties in this. I don't think it even comes up one time.
I mean, this definitely feels like a product of the Clinton era.
100%, yes.
And I think Clinton himself had like a half brother who served as this kind of black sheep figure. I think, yes, he had Roger Clinton, who was an actor in B movies around this time. Roger Clinton was in Pumpkinhead 2, which is the best thing that any Clinton has done, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Do we want to go there?
No. We don't want to talk about his running as the governor of Arkansas either. We just want to talk about this movie, and we're going to talk about this movie by getting into I want to start us off with like talking about something of the movie, because even though this movie's premise is kind of loose.
No.
Okay. All right, that's fine. No,
let me start off by telling you the things I remember about this movie.
Oh, okay. Let's
only things that actually made like a psychic impression upon me, in which I could recall the specifics about this movie. There's a scene where Chris Farley and David Spade are attacked by a bat.
Yes.
Gary Busey basically plays himself.
Gary Busey does play himself. He's becoming more and more like his character in this movie every year that passes.
I think IRL Gary Busey has surpassed the Gary Busey of this movie.
Point. Yes, yeah.
I think he masturbated in a park recently. That's where Gary Busey's at.
And you know what? Gary Busey's so insane that there was this deep fake clip of him going around like sometime last year, and it was him like talking about how much he loves buttered sausage. And I 100% believed it was real, because it's absolutely some just wild shit that he would say. And every year, I would not be surprised if any headline came out if it said that he was in the jungles of Vietnam swinging from trees. I'd be like, yeah, it sounds like Gary Busey.
And here's the thing about Gary Busey. Like, he was not Gary Busey yet. I don't think he was the Gary Busey we know and love of today until like The Apprentice. He started doing The Apprentice.
I think it all started right, because didn't he get in like a motorcycle accident?
He got into a motorcycle accident in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if people started extracting the idea that he was a bizarre person in real life. He had developed a bizarre screen persona
Right.
for sure.
It feels like his from that point forward, it felt like every couple of years he would get a little stranger, and you'd see more about him, and you could find more articles about him, and like if you go through his Wikipedia, you can kind of see that when you start reading about his life, and like you can kind of slowly see his like descent into madness. Which you know what, like if the dude's happy, good for him. I don't know about the whole what he does in parks thing. But you know, like he was on Impractical Jokers a couple of years ago and like played up his craziness and stuff. So like, you know,
Yeah, there's a great question to be asked about how much he is in on the joke of
right,
his reputation. I don't know, but
absolutely.
at this point, he's still consistently turning in like very entertaining
Oh
performances.
yeah.
I think he's the most entertaining part of this movie.
Oh, it's close, man. It all goes back to Farley for me though. Like even in roles like this, and even in Dirty Work, you know, with Norm Macdonald, it's like I don't like that movie at all. That's Norm and Artie, and I'm not a fan of it. And there's some funny parts, don't get me wrong, but it's like Farley in that even shines through. I think he does in this movie. In no, you know, I'm not trying to throw any puns out here, but he shine. He's no, I'm not even gonna say it.
Say it, say it, you
No,
coward.
no,
You
because I know
can't.
I'm gonna misspeak.
Oh, you
uh,
can't do that to me. Get my hopes up.
okay. Here's the thing about Chris Farley in this movie. I do think that something you said earlier I really want to bring back up if I could, because you talked about this sort of being like a highlight reel. You know, where it's like a series of skits with a very loose plot around it. Which, by the way, like the premise that they do have, the idea of this movie, I do like the idea of a movie with that premise. It's very basic. It feels very, you know, of the time. I guess you really wouldn't see a movie like this today. But I like the idea of the premise on its base. But I do think that even though Farley is able to shine through, though, this is gonna sound so strange to say, but Farley shines in all these like highlight scenes, but they bring down the quality of the movie for me.
Well, because they're not scenes that exist to tell a story.
Right.
He does not really play a character that goes through an arc. And when I talk about this, I don't want to make it sound like I'm holding this movie to some some standard of like that. What I'm judging it on is the curve that was set by movies like Tommy Boy.
Right.
Like Tommy Boy, not not a contender for Best Picture. It is not. It does not rank among the most prestigious of American film, but it not only is a funny movie, it's a movie with heart because
Right.
it's centered on a really likable um, but endearingly flawed character played by Chris Farley. Like I don't think he's just playing himself. I think he's playing to his strengths, but scenes of him making these phone calls and accidentally telling this dirty joke to a little girl, and then to him getting attacked by a bat for some reason, and then all of his little banter with David Spade. It's all fine. It's all serviceable. And if you're here for Chris Farley, you're gonna get the greatest hits. But it almost feels like they're taking breaks from the story in order to get to these punchlines.
I wouldn't even say taking breaks from the story. The story is taking breaks from the highlight reel scenes. Like so like the big one for me, and it's one that's memed on a lot. It's a scene where Chris Farley falls down the biggest and longest hill in the world. I mean, it goes on for minutes. Absolutely hilarious to me. I
Feels like a
love that
Family Guy
slapstick
joke.
stuff. It does. It feels like a Family Guy joke. And I love that kind of stuff, you know? Like if it's done right, it gets funny. I think it's done well. I think there are good parts of it. Like it's the fact that it has like segments of him falling down this thing is
Yes.
funny to me. But this kind of goes back to one of my issues with this movie, which is that I've never seen a movie endear me more to its star while also hurting its own value. And it really felt like that was the case in this movie. I felt like every time I saw Chris Farley on screen, I was reminded of how much I love him, how much I was enjoying watching him. But when it came time for me to rate the movie, I had to count some of these scenes against the movie.
But aren't you also feeling that Chris Farley deserved better than this movie?
Well, Chris Farley deserved better than everything he did besides Tommy Boy, in my opinion, when it comes to his starring roles. And it wasn't much, I know that, but like the fact that Tommy Boy showed us something very important about Chris, and it was that he's not just a fall down funny haha guy. That he has acting chops, real acting chops. You can believe the words that he's saying. And even though he had room for improvement, I think we could all agree if you're trying to judge his performance critically, there are parts that he could improve on. He showed that he had he could portray so much heart from a script that was decently written. I think Tommy Boy's a decently written script outside of the comedy stuff. I think that the story's really good, but Chris makes that movie. And I don't think
Well, it's a
he
classic vehicle, and it's something that we
right.
don't really have. Like, I do get nostalgic about this movie because not only does it star an actor who passed away, but it belongs to a type of movie that we don't have anymore. And
Yeah.
it's a weird thing to be nostalgic about, but the star vehicle, like people talk about the fact that we don't have any stars left. And I think the marker for that is that we don't have movies that exist as a showcase for stars' talents. Even Tom Cruise, I wouldn't call Top Gun Maverick a star vehicle. I think he helms a vehicle for the extravaganza of special effects.
I would say that maybe his Mission Impossible, like the more recent Mission Impossible movies, are probably star vehicles for him.
I would not agree with that. I feel like he almost gets lost in the extravagance of that
Oh,
whole operation.
I would agree with you if he didn't get all the credit for them. Like I think, but I won't even get into all that. Here's what I want to say though. I
It
completely
definitely,
agree
in
with
terms
you.
of the comedy world,
Yes.
like I remember do you watch modern SNL at all?
Yeah, I catch mostly clips. I don't usually do the
So
live
do
shows.
you
Yeah.
know the Please Don't Destroy trio?
Oh, I love those guys. Yeah.
They're great. They had a movie that came out on Peacock a few months ago,
Hmm.
and it I didn't watch it because it didn't look like particularly remarkable, but I almost got this warm feeling from just watching a trailer because it was a vehicle for people that I liked that gave them an excuse to be funny, in a feature film format,
Yeah.
in the simplest way, in the simplest terms.
And that's all it needs sometimes. And that's why like I know these SNL movies are clowned on a lot, but I almost miss them in a way because even though some of them are really bad and I won't watch them again, the ones that did hit, they really hit. And it just reminds me of like how if they were careful, I don't think they have any characters nowadays that would really do well in a full movie setting. I think it's really, really difficult to take a character from a at most like 10-minute sketch. That's like at the very most, and make them into like Wayne's World. I think is the exception. It's certainly not the rule.
But I don't know.
Um,
Look at the Blues Brothers. The Blues Brothers conceptually was not even a sketch. It was just a
no,
musical performance from
but I think that's why
John
it
Belushi
works
and Dan
though.
Aykroyd.
I think that's why it works because you have two performers, one of which is like he was gonna take the world by storm if he would have still been with us, and you have another actor who I know you're not the biggest fan of Mr. Aykroyd, but
Don't make it sound like I hate Dan
no,
Aykroyd.
you're
I
just
don't
not the
hate him.
biggest. You're not his biggest supporter. People
His
can go
supporter.
back
He's
and
not running
listen
for
to.
president. I just think after a while it started to become diminishing returns for Mr. Aykroyd. That's all.
As you so eloquently put it, while we were talking about his film Nothing But Trouble, which was a directing and starring, well, kind of starring, co-starring role for Dan Aykroyd. Go check that episode out. You'll be one of 10 people who watched that one. But but no, I mean I'm with you though. I think that this movie does represent. It's not we're not quite at the end of the era when we get to a movie like this, but we're getting towards the end of it. I feel like once we got to like the 2000s, like the end of the 2000s, which is just the next decade after this movie came out, just 4 years after, that's when the decade begins. And we didn't get a whole lot after the 2000s, I don't think. I mean, I can't think of many
Now,
just
that's why
superstar vehicles.
I'm hoping that the Daily Wire can save comedy from the woke mob. Did you? I know I bring this stuff up too much, and I'm guessing a lot of our our viewers aren't interested in this, but I just have to ask you: have you heard about the Daily Wire's comedy movie, Lady Ballers?
Mm, is that the one that was directed by? That's not the one that was directed by Shapiro, was it?
No, no, it
Oh,
was
okay.
directed by the CEO, a
No,
guy named Jeremy Boring.
That's the greatest worst name I've ever heard. No, I have not heard of this.
You haven't heard about it? Okay.
No, 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 no.
Can I tell you a little bit about it?
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if this makes the cut, but yeah, I'm all for it.
Well, I think the thing is why I bring this up. It's because the Daily Wire said that they were trying to bring back this type of comedy movie. The politically incorrect uh dudes just being dudes, bantery, silly, shenanigan driven type of comedy movie. So they're trying to bring back the type of movies that you would have seen Chris Farley and company star in. So the movie Lady Ballers is about a washed up team of basketball players who pretend to be transgender women so they can join the women's division and start dominating
Mm.
there, right? And obviously it's them turning this whole talking point of transgender uh women in sports and turning that into a comedy, into its own feature length movie. It's like the same as taking an SNL sketch, something that's only good for 5 minutes, and turning that into a feature film. You run into the same problem. Okay, you're taking a talking point that your audience is going to eat up in a Ben Shapiro clip. Ben Shapiro destroys some college student, and your audience will eat that up. But even the most transphobic person can't deny that that does not sustain an entire feature film. Just like how something like Coneheads doesn't sustain a feature film.
Well, I don't. Hmm. I want to make sure I elaborate on this after I say it. But hearing that really frustrates me. Hearing and it's not for any reason. Like, look, I think anytime you make a movie, um, how do I put this? Your intention should never be to push anything in my mind. I think the greatest thing about movies and the way that they've evolved over time is that none of it was forced. You can't force people to follow a certain trend. You can't force people to do anything. It's just going to happen. When Star Wars came out back in the 70s, right? Star Wars came out, and there weren't movies before Star Wars that people were demanding to see more of. But when Star Wars came out, everybody started demanding movies like Star Wars. And then times started changing. More sci fi movies started to hit the theaters and they started to get bigger. And then another movie came along, and then another movie came along. And that's how film evolves. A movie comes out and inspires people to do similar things, whether it's in spirit or whether it's in concept or whatever. And I think it's just important for people in the film industry to remember, no matter what side they fall on, whether it's what they think politically, what they think socially, what they think anything. If you just make a movie with the intention of making a good movie or an enjoyable movie for people, maybe you'll make an impact, maybe you won't. But you're no different than everybody else that's done it before you. And the big difference between these movies that come out now that get everybody talking, in my opinion, in the wrong way, is that the people before them, yeah, maybe in their movie they might have been trying to say something. Maybe in their movie they may have been delivering a message. But you know what they were also doing? Making a good movie. And they were focusing on just doing the thing that they wanted to do, and not focusing on any outside factors. And then that film transcended itself and it became something that inspired people who came after it. And so I just wish that people would remember those things, and in thinking, like, you don't have to exclude these topics or real world topics from your movie. I just rewatched Black Christmas during the holiday season and it shot up for me. I
Which
think
Black
it's
Christmas? Like
the
which
original Black Christmas.
Okay.
Yes. And that's a movie that has some things to say here and there. That's got a couple of things in there that are real life issues and real life things that come up. But you know what it also did? It tried to make a really cool movie. And it happened to inspire one of the most popular horror films of all time in Halloween. In a movie that transcended itself and grew into a franchise that many people don't even think should have been a franchise. But guess what? It was that good, and that's how movies should progress. Now, outside of that, this movie, I do think that Black Sheep is a part of a, I guess, sort of like collection of films that do kind of fall into this like absurdist sort of humor of the 90s, but it worked so well because, or it didn't work very well, obviously, but that style of humor worked so well because of when it came out. And I think when you make an authentic movie that fits that bill, people take to it. But when you make a movie that feels inauthentic, which I do think that Black Sheep does feel inauthentic, it feels like a movie that was trying to capitalize off of the success of Tommy Boy. I think it feels like a film that is trying to almost act as an acting reel for Chris Farley and David Spade, for the things that that the studio think they did well in Tommy Boy,
Right.
and it's difficult to watch in that way.
By the way, I'm glad you touched on something. So when we talk about the diminishing returns from this, from Tommy Boy to this, right? We need to talk about the other half of the equation, right?
Right.
Because it's Chris Farley and David Spade. And I think he's actually the thing that's noticeably off about this project, right? From Tommy Boy to this, you see that there wasn't the same kind of chemistry. There wasn't the same the people involved in this didn't seem to understand what made those guys such a great comedy duo, right? It's not just that Chris Farley is a goofball and David Spade is smarmy and uptight, which both those things are true. But in Tommy Boy, those characters have a real history and a this back and forth that really compels them both as characters. And one of the best scenes of Tommy Boy, it's not just them annoying each other, getting on each other's nerves. What about the scene when the Carpenters comes on the radio and neither of them can admit that they like the song, so they just they keep saying, oh, I mean, I don't even care if you want to change it, go right ahead. No, I mean, I don't care. And then hard cut to them crying, singing along to the lyrics of Karen Carpenter. That's where the humanity, that's where the magic happens to me, right? Because that's a really sweet moment. Nothing like that in Black Sheep.
The thing that gets me too is like, and people might clown on me for this, I don't know. I think David Spade could have been more than he was. I think one of the issues is like people behind movies, and maybe it's his fault, you know, I don't know, maybe Tommy Boy was a fluke, but I feel like people don't understand the things that he does well. You know, like that scene is a good one, but another scene that I think of is when he talks, when he's just going at Chris Farley's character for how he treated his father, and about how he took advantage and he took him for granted, and about how, you know, he never had a father, and that was his father figure, and, you know, all he wanted to do was impress him and all that stuff. Like, that was a good scene. And I feel like when David Spade is funny in Tommy Boy, there's a very specific reason he's being funny. It's because he's allowed to be funny the way that David Spade is comfortable being funny. And when you see him in interviews, it's funny how somebody in interviews can be more likable and funny than any film role that they've been in because they're doing what they're comfortable doing when it comes to their comedy. And I don't think there are a lot of movies showcasing that for David Spade, to be completely honest with you, this one included.
David Spade is a guy that is very easy to dismiss. I know that because I didn't take him seriously for a pretty long time. I grew up in the era of Grown Ups. That was the David Spade that I knew. Yeah, Joe Dirt. And he was more famous, I think, for kind of going on talk shows and kind of like reminiscing about the past or being a plus one to some bigger comic. In fact, you know, he goes from being Chris Farley's sidekick to basically Adam Sandler's sidekick. I mean, that's a guy with like 5 sidekicks. You know, he's the Superman to a B tier list of Justice
God.
League comedians.
Yeah, that's another thing that bugs me with one comic specifically in that group. But you're right. Yeah, it's just it's he did he played second fiddle to Chris Farley. Which look, man, that's like it's not always bad to be a sidekick. Scottie Pippen was the sidekick to Michael Jordan, and he still won 6 championships.
Well, Scottie Pippen was also the least paid member of the Chicago Bulls.
He was, and when he tried to get paid, they sent him to Houston. And then that is what it is. But either way, Scottie Pippen goes down as one of the 50 greatest players of all time, according to NBA analysts, and according to the recent lists that they've made, and the lists that have come out since the 2010s. After he had been retired for a little bit, he didn't retire till like 05. But I don't think David Spade was ever going to be the Pippen to Farley's Jordan, nor do I think he is the Pippen to Adam Sandler's Jordan. I think he could have made a very good career off of being the sidekick to Chris Farley. I do think that he genuinely was hurt, not just emotionally because it was his friend, but I think his career was hurt by the passing of Chris Farley, because I think if Farley could have had that turnaround, who's to say he wouldn't have taken Spade with him?
Well, the thing is that as we compare Chris Farley to John Belushi, I think there's a comparison between David Spade and Dan Aykroyd, two guys who were extremely close with their partners, right? They were more than just collaborators. They were truly like buddies in arms, friends in arms in the comedy world. And I think it was a devastating loss to both of them personally, and I think it also must have forced them to rethink their career. I think the thing about David Spade that a lot of people don't know is I think he's more comfortable as a stand-up comic. I think he's more comfortable in that kind of environment. I'm not saying he doesn't have talent as an actor, but when I see him on roasts, like doing like Comedy Central roasts, or when I see like old stand-up clips that he used to do after after the run with Chris Farley came to an end, that's where I see him as being more comfortable, because I think he's a witty guy. I think he has a great sense of delivery in that context. But for this role, he couldn't plug into it the way that Chris Farley could. Chris Farley could take a very underdeveloped character and bring him to life, and David Spade couldn't do the same, not for his material. And to be fair, his character it's a really nothing character. I mean, he's a tacked on addition to this whole story. You could write him out of the movie pretty easily, I would argue.
I think you could, and I think one thing to think of when you're discussing that is that this movie didn't know everything that Chris Farley did well, but it knew some of what he did well, and some of that was still there, and of course he's gonna nail that because he's Chris Farley. He's really good at the things that he does, and he's very good at a lot of things. I do think that this movie was almost, it felt like it was written. I don't want to say maliciously to discredit David Spade, but it really did feel like just gross negligence, of just like, hey, we watched Tommy Boy and we love you guys together, so we're gonna put you in another movie together, and we're gonna make it a funny fall down haha Chris Farley movie, and that's all he's gonna do is Matt Foley his way around the set, that one scene from Tommy Boy where this, that other scene from Tommy Boy where this, we're gonna do that but this way, and you can't really do it that way. And I think David Spade's character was missing the heart that Tommy Boy had. I don't think this movie is heartless by any means. I think that the bits of story that we do get, seeing his brother, the politician, defend Chris Farley's character and always stands by him, always sticks by him no matter what he does to his career. I think there is some heart there.
The actual character of the candidate, of Chris Farley's brother, he's actually really underrated as we talk about this movie, and he serves a very important function. Not only is he the straight man, I feel like he's almost the heart. It's his.
I agree.
And it's a bit of a shame to me that the relationship isn't more on the story isn't really centered on their relationship as much. they feel very distant as characters, but I think the movie definitely tugged at my heartstrings the most when it played directly off of their relationship. And that actor, it's really ironic. That actor who plays the political candidate, he goes on to play the vice president of the West Wing show.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
And I do want to say one thing. I think it's because they're wasting some time trying to give this movie more heart by making Chris Farley's best friend a child, and focusing on that relationship more. Like they don't. It's not that they don't focus on the relationship between brother and brother. They just do it in a way that's very disconnected from each other.
Right.
They'll have a scene where they talk and something happens, and then the brother is like, yeah, like you really gotta stop doing this. You're kind of messing this up for me, but I still love you. You're my brother. I wouldn't have it any other way with you. By my side. And then after that, it's like, here's this evil henchman that's on the good guy's side trying to convince this politician that his brother is no good. And then here are these mean politicians on the other side. And here's Chris Farley on one side, just still doing ridiculous shit and getting himself into trouble. And it's like, I do wish that there were more scenes of Chris Farley being introspective. I think we get that for such a short period of time, and we get several moments of that in Tommy Boy, which I think helps him. He almost changes his ways in waves, right? He kind of discovers who he should be and how he should carry himself moving forward in waves in Tommy Boy. In this, it's just like there's one scene where he realizes he is a complete and total fuck up and that he needs to be better. But they don't even play that into a story arc, because then he ends up saving the day by being a fuck up. He doesn't change anything. He's still the same fucking idiot. He just gets lucky. And even though I think it's endearing that he gets lucky and that it happens that way, he still is doing it in a way it's the same thing he's done since the beginning of the movie. It just works for him. Am I wrong?
A lot of movies fall victim to that too. And again, it rests on the shoulders of Chris Farley. Like
Right.
I'm happy for his character because I'm happy for Chris Farley. I want to see that man happy, right?
Yeah.
And it's a cheat code. It's shorthand, but that climax, I think that's definitely when my wife just turned on this movie. She was not impressed, but when when Gary Busey really comes into the picture and hijacks the movie as he does, yeah, I think I actually appreciated it because the only thing the movie had going for it was this sense of wacky zaniness that Chris Farley really could embrace and he could really play off of. Like that almost became his scene partner. Just the silliness of this world, of the logic. So I actually appreciated the left turn it took, but it took a huge left turn, and it almost gives up on the pretense that this is a Chris Farley David Spade movie.
Yeah, it turns into a Gary Busey solo movie.
Yeah,
It's
essentially.
I do really like I like aspects of this is what I feel terribly for talking so negative about this movie so far, because everything that I said that's negative, I do have positives to say about. Like, oh yeah, they're not using Farley to his strengths, and it's just like, Fatty falls down, people laugh. That's what he used to say about his comedy style and how, when he was being really down on himself. But he happens to be very good at that, and he knew he was good at that, and that's why he would, get down on himself sometimes about it. And this movie does it well. The scenes that are these highlight scenes that we're talking about are very funny, most of them. And I do think that ending sequence, probably the most wild shit they probably could have thought of. I think I couldn't really believe what I was watching during certain parts of that scene. But it still tried to have this, story significance and this heart, and it was still funny. So it's like, I have
Yeah.
bad things to say about this movie, but there are some positives sprinkled in there about it too.
The thing is, this is not a movie for analysis. This is a movie just to
Right.
be watched. This is a movie to be enjoyed. It's like imagine inviting a friend over, and then after he leaves, you like kind of go through your notes about how the evening went and breaking down like, oh, did that joke you make, did that really land? Oh, I feel like I feel like this night really relied too much on like alcohol. I think, breaking it down almost clinically, you could do that. You could like kind of grade your friend, and the next time he shows up, you can give him like a
Brought
report card.
brought Walmart brand paper towels instead of Bounty. It's
But
got to be a point against them.
this movie has it has a charm. It has
I agree.
a time capsule charm. It represents a movie that existed for a certain period of time. It was at the
Yep.
crossroads of a lot of trends that I'm personally fond of, and it provided room for one of the great comedians of the last 25 years. It gave Chris Farley a sandbox, basically.
Right.
And I don't think he was degraded by this. I know he was personally very disappointed by this movie, not as much as Beverly Hills Ninja, but he definitely felt like it was a step back. And I'm sure that was a very hard thing for him to take. But I don't think watching this, you feel sorry for him. I didn't have that reaction. I guess I felt like I had missed the opportunity to make a new Chris Farley fan out of my wife. Maybe it wasn't the best introduction to him. This is the perfect way to describe this movie, right? It's not going to turn you into a Chris Farley fan, but it is going to be of service to Chris Farley fans.
And it's definitely not going to turn you off of Chris Farley either, or at least if you're already a fan, it's not going to like deter you from continuing your fandom of Chris
No, I
Farley.
don't think so. I mean, my wife is glad that he's dead, but I think she could be an anomaly. I'm so sorry, honey. I'm sorry.
You're fucked, dude. Oh god. No, but like even Almost Heroes, like I think Almost Heroes is the first movie that I really do feel bad for Chris. I
Not
think
Beverly Hills
that
Ninja.
no, honestly, I'm gonna save my opinions on Beverly Hills Ninja because I have a feeling it might come up this season. We'll
Oh
find
boy.
out. But no, I Almost Heroes is really the only movie where I see him in that I do feel bad for him. I feel like he wasn't being utilized to the best of his ability, and I feel like he was very much like a John Candy. You know, when John Candy, when he would be interviewed after, he was interviewed after one of his movies that failed critically and commercially, and he was asked if he takes it if it hurts him, and he's like, of course, it's my job to not only provide entertainment for people but to help the people making the movie, make sure they can feed their families and make sure they can do all this, and that's on you, and when you fail, that doesn't feel good. And Chris Farley, all of his friends after the fact, which is unfortunate we couldn't really hear it from him, and we never would have, I don't think. He wasn't really one of those guys to go on a talk show and open up. He was there to make
Everything was a
people laugh.
performance for Chris,
Yes,
right?
everything. And
Everything. It was all the Chris Farley show. That's the name of his
yes,
autobiography. I wish his oral history biography, which I
mhm,
recommend to any fans of his,
yes,
because and that's kind of the plight of the comedian as we understand it looking back. I think people are trying to change that. I think a guy like Pete Davidson, who's not funny all the time, he takes stops to not be funny.
yeah,
And obviously, that turns a lot of people off. They compare him to the comedians of the past. Like Chris Farley would not make a tweet about contemplating suicide. Like he wouldn't do that.
right.
But at the same time, like Pete Davidson, even though he doesn't look like it, he seems to be a very stable person who's doing well for himself. I think there's totally a place for a comedian to publicly stop performing for us and to invite a conversation about mental health, about substance abuse struggles. Like, I'm not saying if Chris Farley had really had a public discussion about those problems that he would still be here. Who knows? But I also don't think it's fair for Pete Davidson or other comedians of his generation. We shouldn't hold him to those standards because it was not a safe environment for performers. Like SNL, like in its heyday, was like a toxic work environment.
I also think it's important to say too that like comedians are not quite on the level of like professional football players or professional wrestlers of like just dying at alarming rates. But I do think that even though like I think what we've had so far is alarming. I think it's sad when a comedian spends their whole life making us laugh. I think about this story this former child actor was telling about working with Robin Williams when they were a kid, and they he was out in front of everybody, and he was doing his bit, and he was going everywhere, and he was going crazy and everything, and then he went back to his trailer, and this child actor went back to spend some time with him, and when I don't remember if it was a he or she, but when they walked in there, he was sobbing his eyes out. And it's just to think of, I don't care who the comedian is, I don't care how funny they are, I don't care how good they are at being the performer all the time. If it helps anybody to just speak about what's going on in their lives, or to talk about it, or if they feel like they're making an impact and it makes them feel good to do it, which is, I think, what Pete Davidson does it for. I mean, I don't know the guy, but it seems like he talks about this to be relatable. And to be fair to Pete Davidson as well, even if that's not something he's interested in doing, it is a more relatable thing now. People, are more open about talking about the things that are happening with them. And even though I'm not going to come on the show and I'm not going to, tell everybody what my issues have been, if it came down to it and that was going to help me, I'm not going to criticize anybody for doing that. And obviously we don't know if that would have helped somebody like Chris Farley fighting the battles that he was fighting, or somebody like Robin Williams, or any of the comedians that we've lost over time. But I don't think, I think both sides of it are valid as long as it's helping the person behind the persona.
I also just think that's a reason why a company like the Daily Wire, they're not going to create a comedy or really any piece of entertainment that fulfills that for audiences the way that a Chris Farley could, because I think it takes a certain amount of introspection to really channel those personal demons into something creative. And I don't think that the Daily Wire, I don't think Ben Shapiro is adept at self criticism, let alone introspection. And not that this movie is taking a stand for any of those issues, but Chris Farley, that's, I think, just as much his legacy, right? Is how we talk about what performers go through, particularly comedians, because even though they're not, it's not like what I think athletes go through, the way that needs to be severely addressed because of the physical and mental and emotional and psychological beatings they go through. It's so crazy that, yeah, a guy who seemed to have such an infectious charisma and sense of humor and love for life that Chris Farley did, still fell victim to things that everybody does. You don't have to be a comedian to have a substance abuse problem.
Or to have have issues with depression. I mean, everybody who was like, if you watch documentaries about Chris Farley, like, I mean, even the song that I mentioned earlier from Adam Sandler, he talks about walking into their office that they shared at Saturday Night Live, and Farley was crying to a Casey and the Sunshine Band song because he missed his dad so much, and he didn't get to see his father ever. He didn't get to go home, and he was always performing and doing things, and keeping himself occupied. And it's a story, it's a tale as old as time when it comes to comedians. Is that even the just iconic imagery from olden times was that here's this jester, and behind the mask is a crying face, or a clown with a crying face behind him. It's like, there's a tragedy to comedy, and I think trying to force any type of comedy will come across as that. I think that's why I've had such a hard time with comedy movies over the last, say, decade, is because a lot of it does feel like it's emulating, or a lot of it does feel like it's trying to force comedy. And it's why when a movie does come out that makes me laugh, I really take to it, and I really want to talk about it, and I really want to let people know they should go see it. Like when I saw Good Boys quite a few years ago, and I said, "Wow, this made me laugh very hard. I'm gonna tell people they should see this." Um, and it's kind of sad that that's lost on us, but I don't think it's something that will be lost forever. I do think that there are still movies that break through that are very funny. I do still think that there is a place for that sort of comedy birthed out of tragedy, and maybe we'll get there one day where more movies are like that. This movie definitely doesn't have any inspiration of that coming from anywhere.
I like how we went on this whole diatribe about mental health and the way we need to
Yeah,
address the.
and we'll put some links in the
the
in the description for those things as well.
yeah, we'll also include a link so you can watch Lady Ballers, my favorite movie of last year.
No.
I was looking for an excuse to become a Daily Wire subscriber, and thankfully, they delivered. And now I can give Ben Shapiro my money with no shame or guilt. I don't know why he comes up so often on this podcast. I don't know, other than my timeline was infected with trailers for that movie for the last 3 months.
I'm lucky enough to have tricked my algorithm across social media. I don't see anything from either side. I just live, man. Like it'll
Wow.
something will break through every once in a while, but only things that I engage with are things that show up now. So I'm lucky.
Yeah, now that
Um,
Chris Christie's dropped out, you really have no reason to be invested, huh?
nah, no, I don't.
Chris
No, I
Christie,
really
the
don't,
Chris
man.
Farley of the GOP? No, that's a terrible thing to say. That's a What an awful thing to say. Oh my god.
But no, in all seriousness, I wanna just say something positive about this movie because, like I said, we have been beating it up. I do want
Yeah,
to say that
this has been more negative than I was expecting. Like
yes,
because I've been basically defending it from my wife, my vicious wife, and I realize that when I'm not having to defend it, right? It is a movie that I realize should have been of a higher standard, I think, for the mission that it had, which was to give Chris Farley a film career. Like, he deserved one. I don't know why the movie was only written in less than a week.
and that's not always the mark for a bad movie either. I mean, like John Hughes was famous for being able to write his scripts extremely quickly, and he's made some of the you know some of my
He wrote
favorite
the
movies.
first drafts quickly.
Yeah,
the
right.
The thing is, the shooting script was written in a week.
And that's tough. But I don't want it to seem like this movie's all bad. I think it is a tough one to defend as a whole. I mean, I think it's one of those movies that you just have to tell people like, look, do you like slapstick Chris Farley stuff? Because if you do, you'll like this, and it's got a little bit of heart here and there. It's got Gary Busey. This is exactly how I would describe it to somebody if they were like, "Hey, what do you think about Black Sheep?" I'd be like, "Well, Chris Farley falls down. It's pretty funny when he does. Gary Busey's in there being Gary Busey, and David Spade is there, and I do think some of the stuff between Farley and Spade does still work.
Hmm.
I don't want to pretend like they don't have any chemistry. I think there isn't. I'm going to say something negative, but I'm going to follow it up by saying something positive. I do think that this movie has an awkwardness about it. I do think that some of the lines of dialogue and the interactions between people are awkward. One of the ones I highlighted was there was a scene where there's this old couple and they're in their car talking while Chris Farley is stuck in their trunk. That's a reoccurring theme in this movie is that Chris Farley gets stuck in things, um,
Like planes.
like planes at the end of the movie.
See,
Um,
Tom Cruise, you're not the first to do it.
no, you're not. Suck it, bitch. Anyways, no, that was a little too harsh. I actually don't. I'm a Tom Cruise defender when it comes to his film career. But
You're just saying that
anyways,
because you're a Scientologist, okay?
I mean, I do get the Scientology channel on my television service, so say what you will about that. However, no, but like that scene is just the dialogue is really awkward. I do think some of the interactions between Farley and Spade are awkward, but I think that kind of comes from a place of neither of them are really having the script play into their strengths as actors or comedic actors. If you want to separate those out, I don't know why you would. I think they both have they're both in the same category, but I do think that at the end of the day, there is still a chemistry there. It does still feel special seeing them on screen together. It still feels fun seeing them on screen together, and I'm glad at least that they didn't replace David Spade in this movie because I do think it would have hurt it. I do think that their chemistry and them being together, whether it's just a holdover from Tommy Boy for me, I don't know, but I think if they would have replaced him with somebody else, especially some schmuck like Rob Schneider, we would have never. I don't think this movie would even be in a conversation of at a 2.9. Like it sits right now at the time of filming. Hopefully, we give it a bump, but
Is this the only other time they made a movie together?
to my knowledge, yes, at least like in a sense of them interacting on film. I
They were
believe that's
definitely planning on more collaborations. Like, I think there was a script for a Matt Foley movie. There was a couple other projects. I mean, just like Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, there was always going to be a future for these two. I mean, they had an irreplaceable chemistry, and it's still, I mean, it's still apparent even through this movie. But at the same time, when you look back at this and compare it to the things that made them the stars that they were, like Tommy Boy, like those, like that, golden era of SNL they were a part of. Yeah, it's worth noting that it's autopilot. It's an autopilot version. That's
And
I
I
think what the awkwardness is
yeah.
not going through the motions like they didn't care, but being asked to carry something that was a slapdash production.
I think it was uncarryable. And I think, and I want to clarify too, like what you were saying, because I believe I know what you were saying, is that the actors themselves don't. It's not that they are phoning it in or
They are
anything.
not phoning it in.
It is
Definitely not
that
Chris Farley.
they are asked to do something in carrying this movie and making it seem like it has more heart than it does, making it seem like it has more story and more all context and all of these things than it does, and it doesn't have that. And so you get this awkwardness, and
Uh-huh.
there are lines that are written that are meant to be funny that just aren't, and there's no real way to deliver those well.
Basically, it's this was a job, right? When we talk about
Yeah.
film, and especially when it comes to comedy, we sentimentalize what must be the atmosphere and the temperament of that production, right? It's hanging out with your friends, it's goofing off, it's, the best comedies will not make it look like work. I think this looked like a job from both of them, a job they did as professionals, but I don't get that infectious charm, that parasocial friendship from Tommy Boy.
And let's be real, that's part of why this movie's even eligible for the show to begin with. It's the biggest part, I think. I think if this movie came first, I wonder if it would have been looked upon more favorably. I really
I
wonder if it would have.
That's a great question.
I don't think it would be eligible for this show at the very least. I think it'd be low threes.
A
I think it'd be one of
3.1.
those.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I think
call it a
like yeah,
3.1.
3.1. I think a 3.1 because I think it's something that they'd be like, this was the beginning of the Farley and Spade stuff.
But
This is where it started.
here's what would have happened. This movie would have People would have said Chris Farley's movie career is kind of stumbling out of the gate, but we'll give him time. Then Tommy Boy would come out, and people would say this movie perfected what Black Sheep was trying to do.
Yes, and I instead of saying, "Wow, Farley was really good in Tommy Boy. Let's see what he does next," and then being like, "Oh, well, that was a fluke.
It was
Tommy Boy was a fluke."
I don't know if people were saying it was a fluke. I mean, people knew enough about his personal life. People knew that
Right.
he was a guy fighting issues, and it's like when you go through a production and the mental fortitude, the focus, it doesn't just take talent. In fact, some people would argue that talent is kind of low
Yeah.
on the list of things you need to execute one of these things. It takes this kind of clarity about who you are and what you are here to do. And I don't want God, why do our discussions get so pretentious? I feel like it's because I run out of things to say about a movie like Black Sheep pretty quickly. So I started talking about like, oh, the nature of the art form, and like I start sounding like a like a motivational instructor. Like, oh, it takes more than talent, man. It takes focus. It takes mental fortitude. I start selling like brain pills or
The college professor who just loves his source material just a little too much, you know?
yeah.
Where when he starts teaching, it's just like, you're really enjoying this, aren't you?
Yeah, is there anything else though?
That's the thing. I really don't think so. I mean, for me, I'm ready to give a final verdict.
Same.
I think it's about time. I think we've crossed into so many different avenues about Farley's career and about fucking everything in between. So I think yeah, I think it's a good time to deliver our final verdicts. Who do we want? How do we want to do this in season two? Do we want the person who picked it to go last? What do we want to do here? This was your pick, by the way. I want to make
This
that
was
clear to
my pick.
everybody.
This
It
was
was
my
on my
pick.
lists,
Mhm.
but it was Gabe's turn. So
Yeah, so given that it's my pick, my verdict is probably going to be surprising. It's a little surprising to me, but after the intellectual debate that we just had, and we really examined this movie conceptually. We didn't break it down scene by scene. To be honest, though, I think the way to talk about this movie would be to just talk about it scene by scene, because basically it's kind of a scoreboard movie. By that I mean you just have to weigh the jokes that didn't work and the ones that did work, and count them up. I mean, the amazing thing about comedy is it's not about the quantity of jokes to me. It's it should work the way other movies work. It should be about the emotions too. It should be about emotional. Now, let me take a step from that. It should function on the same levels that other types of movies do. I should not just like the actor who plays the character. I should be invested enough in the character to at least assess if they changed or not. I should care enough about the themes of the movie to be able to have some kind of some kind of an analysis of it. But does this movie speak to its subject matter? I wouldn't say so. It's shockingly apolitical given the climate it came out in, when that was kind of when political humor was really in vogue. But I don't know if Chris Farley would have been comfortable with that. Yeah, I'm just going through it and I'm counting the jokes that worked, and I would say the ratio, um, it just doesn't skew in the movie's favor. The hits to misses ratio, it doesn't have a good batting average, and with a movie that was clearly a rushed script that was just meant to be a star vehicle for somebody whose career really needed a lot more uh, care and attention than it would receive. Yeah, I'm gonna say that it's actually pretty generous, a 2.9. Uh, it does not deserve a 3. It is that bad. My wife is going
Start.
to be very vindicated, by the way.
Yeah. Well, if you're not dead before, for all the wishing Chris Farley dead lines in there. Um, okay, that's interesting. So, all right. So, I talked about this movie very negatively throughout this. This might be one of the more negative episodes of the show, and I hate to start season 2 off that way. But I want people to know that it didn't come from a place of like malice or anything like that. Like I'm really just kind of like everybody else that watched this probably at the time. I'm just kind of disappointed. I love Chris Farley so much. I think Tommy Boy is actually one of my favorite comedy films of all time. It's in my top 10. Maybe top 5. I haven't I haven't put together that list, but it's possible. Um, I don't think this movie is as disappointing as critics made it seem to be at the time, especially.
I do think it's fair to
Um,
point out that if we were having this conversation in 1996, I would say it's not that bad, because people
right.
were putting it on their worst of the year list.
Yes.
That's not cool.
Right. And I think there are a lot of things to consider when you watch this movie. And there are a lot of ways that you could watch this movie. You could watch it from a perspective that we normally would on this show. And by the way, like that can change on this show. I don't want it to make it seem like everything we watch we're trying to be critical of or anything like that. In fact, I think our show is kind of the opposite of that. We may be kind of reviewing these movies in a sense, but we're here to defend them. We're here to judge a movie on its merits and give it credit for the things it does well. And I do think this movie has a good amount of things it does well. I do think if you
Hmm.
submitted this as a um if you took acting scenes from Tommy Boy and funny haha fall down scenes from this movie, you would have the perfect acting reel for Chris Farley. I think if you look at Gary Busey in this movie, I think you can have a lot of fun with his character and the things that he does and the craziness that he brings to this. I think there is a lot of heart when you get down to the character Chris Farley's brother, who's running for office, and his unconditional love of his idiotic brother, who through his persistence of wanting to keep his brother around ends up letting him help him in the end. Um, and I think there are a lot of things that you can enjoy about this. I just think that if you go into it like anybody would, by the way, I don't want to make it sound like anybody wouldn't do this or wouldn't be right to do this, but if you go into this expecting an experience that is at all similar to the experience you had with Tommy Boy, you're probably not going to get it. Um, but if you do try to have fun with this, there's fun to be had. So I think for now, I think I'm gonna have to say that I think 2.9 is right on the money. Um, I really wanted to say that I thought this was not that bad, and parts of it I think are not that bad. The people who criticize Farley's performance in this, I think I would certainly say are incorrect, at least in my mind. But I think the factor of even when you don't compare this movie to Tommy Boy, it's still disappointing, and I can't overlook that with my final verdict. So I will agree with my co-host and say that Black Sheep is that bad. I didn't want to be here, man. It was on my list. Like if you wouldn't have covered this, I'd have brought this at some point. So it's disappointing for us to both be on. It's
This
that
is
bad. But
Waterworld 2. That's what this
you know what
played
though?
out like.
I do appreciate this movie for being not Waterworld. You know, and we just at the time of making this, we just released a teaser that we're coming back for season 2. And we made it seem like we were gonna, that the show was gonna be over, and we talked about how this show is so much fun except for Waterworld. This is an episode where we both landed on it's that bad, just like on the Waterworld episode. But I would argue that this conversation was more fun. I would argue that this movie is a lot more fun to watch. Given the choice between this movie and Waterworld, it would easily be this movie. I mean, given the choice between being waterboarded or watching Waterworld, I think I would choose the former. It just comes down to your sensibilities.
Yeah.
If you've never seen Tommy Boy and you watch this, maybe you'll land on the other side of the fence. And I would love to hear some defenses of this movie too. Bring it to the comments or message us. I don't care. Do whatever. Send us an email on our website,
Approach me on the
notthatbadpod.com.
street.
Approach me on the street. Yeah, if you see me in public and you know me,
My address will be down in the description.
we're gonna dox Gabe in this episode. No, but seriously, tell us how you feel about this, because I would love to hear a perspective of a fan of Black Sheep. I would love to see if somehow my mind could be turned, because I'm not far off. I would give this movie a 2.9 if I could.
I don't know. Are you looking for an excuse to call this not that bad?
I kind of am, and I don't know if it's just because of Farley, but okay. I want to say that I want to say that I like this.
You know what this movie revealed to me? Just how much of a sentimental viewer I am. And that's something I knew about myself, but I don't think I realized just how much my sobby heart could carry me through a mediocre movie just because it stars an actor that I really love who died very tragically. I mean, it definitely is something that makes me more inclined to like this movie, which is that objectively the right way to watch movies? Probably not. You shouldn't go into a movie putting expectations on it to be this opportunity to be, Chris Farley's last great movie, right? That's not what they were trying to do when they made this. They didn't know he was going to die young. It was just another Chris Farley movie. It happened to be one of his final ones. And I will say, of his whole filmography, this is the consensus runner-up to Chris Farley's best movie.
I would say so.
Easily. Of the movies he starred in, of his vehicles?
Of his movies, not the movies that he appeared in. I think the movies he appeared in, I mean, leaps and bounds ahead of this. But, I do think that this could very well be considered his, I don't know how you can consider anything else. The number
Maybe
2.
the Almost Heroes fans are going to be jumping down our throats.
Please, that's what I love about this show is, and maybe the Beverly Hills Ninjas fans will show up.
And see,
I
the
hope
thing is,
so.
I know when I watch Almost Heroes, I'm going to root for it so hard because it stars not one, but two tragically deceased comedians that fucking struggled publicly with substance abuse. And it's Matthew Perry died just a couple months ago. Very surreal. Very surreal that Matthew Perry was alive and now he's not. And now I'm binging Friends and tearing up like a bitch at some of the most banal episodes, just if it features Matthew Perry as Chandler Bing, reminding us of just how much we liked him.
Well, you brought something up I wanna talk about first. I do want to say that even though that this movie is the consensus number 2, I would put Beverly Hills Ninja above it personally. We'll see if that holds up when it appears on this show.
I think that's the first hot take of the episode.
Yeah,
so
first hot
I'm
take.
glad we got one in there.
Yes, but I do want to say something that you mentioned about watching movies, and I think when you put an expectation on a film that you watch, you do have to be careful. But I do think that one thing that's very important is not to undersell the value of nostalgia or sentimentality when it comes to watching films either. I think one of the movies that I can bring up as an example of that for me is a movie we've had on the show, the Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. That's a movie that people shit on all the time, and I can definitely see what people are saying about certain things. But like, is Jar Jar annoying? Yeah, but like, was he a big part of my childhood? Absolutely. So am I gonna defend him? 100%. Go fuck yourself. Is he kind of a racist caricature? I get it. Yeah, maybe. I don't know, but that's the thing is like when you watch movies, I think such an important component is how they make you feel. Whether that's from the movie you're watching or from something else that an actor was in or that character was in. Maybe it's a sequel. Maybe it's just another film in an actor's filmography. Maybe it's a television show that they were in, like you said with Friends. I think it's just important to embrace the emotions that movies give us and not to let that be undervalued when you're giving a rating for a movie. And I certainly don't.
Yeah. And that's why, despite all of its flaws, I'm a really big fan of Lady Ballers because it gives me the feeling
all right.
of owning the libs.
Well, folks, if we exist after this episode for the rest of season 2, thank you for joining us for the return of Not That Bad. We look
also the end of Not That Bad. We are unfortunately,
the end.
We have to cancel the podcast now.
If we don't cancel it ourselves, we will be canceled. So but we really do appreciate you checking out this new episode. We're really excited to kind of give you guys some cool stuff moving forward, whether it's in season 2 of Not That Bad. We'll kind of be releasing some details about what that's going to look like for our future as we go here. This show, like we said from the beginning, we're growing with you guys. We're hoping to continue to grow and evolve as you listen to our show. And one of the ways that you can help us do that is by supporting our
by giving us your money.
Yes, by selling out to Not That Bad.
They respect the honesty, Connor. Just ask them for their money.
And we may depending on how things go, one of the things, obviously to be transparent with everybody, the break was not always the plan. And things can happen. So if you want to get us one step closer to making this show a regular fixture, making this show a little bit more secure, it's not at all required, but we would love for you to check out our Patreon. Depending on timing and stuff, we might have to make some changes to our tiers. We don't know what's going to happen with the show moving forward as far as that's concerned, but what we do know is no matter whether you subscribe now or if we have to change the tiers in the future, I can tell you that you're going to have a blast with us there. You get a ton of exclusive stuff. You get to have a lot of fun. If you subscribe at a certain level or above, you get a nice little sticker. A Not That Bad sticker for your collection. Maybe we'll throw a season 2 sticker up there if you guys like what you see. And you can get a whole lot of stuff from that. But Gabe, where else can they find information about, say, the co-hosts or maybe a library of former episodes? Where could they go for that?
I don't know. Have you guys heard of Google?
You basically were just like, Google me, bitch.
If you don't know how to use Google, no. You can find us on social media at Twitter, X,
if you want to, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. The website that I still have an account on for some reason, you can find us there. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us wandering the streets at night, lamenting the state of cinema and sobbing over the passing of Chris Farley or John Belushi. We're around. I mean, we're accessible. We're happy to, have a shoulder to cry on. So again, approach us in the streets.
And you can regularly find Gabe in abandoned school buildings with a camera looking for potentially made up monsters. That's something that that this guy does all the time. But if you want to find links to any of our stuff, including Gabe's film that I just referenced, The Curse of Professor Sardonicus, out now, links to that, links to all of our socials, links to all of our old episodes, you can find it on notthatbadpod.com. You see the graphic on the page here. If you go to that site, you can find anything you want about the show. And at some point, maybe we'll throw some extra stuff up there, like some merchandise. Who knows if somebody wants some Not That Bad
if we're feeling nice.
Yeah. If we're feeling nice, we'll let you spend money on our show. So we'll see if we do. Either way, we appreciate all of the support, all of the well wishes during our time away, and all of the support that hopefully we don't lose moving forward. So, Gabe, anything else you'd like to say before you take us out of the first episode of season 2?
To follow that up, no, I think you summed it up perfectly.
Cool. Glad I was able to be of service finally.
Yeah.
After a year and a half of doing this show, I'm glad I was able to be useful one time.
Aw. Hey, Connor, I didn't know that you liked fishing. Since you love fishing for compliments. Okay, guys, it's time to take it out. It was our first episode after a hiatus. Please forgive us if our true selves were revealed over the course of this episode.
Gotta scrape the rust off. Yeah.
All right, y'all. I'm Gabe.
I am Connor.
And this is Not That Bad. Returning back to all of your regular podcast listening platforms as we continue in the future to defend the movies that you hate. And sometimes, maybe we'll even shit on the movies you love. It can work out a number of ways. All right, guys. Bye.